Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're thrilled to have you join us for today's webinar. Today, we have the incredible opportunity to hear firsthand from Michelle about his journey, what challenges he faced, the pivotal decisions he made, and the skills that helped him rise to the top. I'm Nalabja, your host for today. I lead content at Zenskar, and I couldn't be more excited to dive into this conversation. Michelle, can we start by having you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you for having me, first and foremost. My name is Michell Guzelgul. I am the CFO at Empeon. Looking forward to just chatting and kind of tell you about my experience and how I got here, and hopefully some people can learn from my journey.
Awesome. Why don't you expand upon what is it that you do at Empeon and how did you decide to get into finance?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, CFO here at Empeon, and it's more on the strategic aspect of this company. And it's more being the right-hand man to the CEO and the driving value through anything finance related, compliance. It's when the CEO, who's essentially overseeing the company, needs somebody by their side to kind of drive the day-to-day operation in terms of what they're expecting from just this regular CFO, from the budgeting, forecasting, etc. But it's not something that he's going to do on his own. So he needs somebody to take his initiative, take his vision, and essentially get that done. In addition, what's the second portion of the question?
How did you decide to get into this field?
Sure. So I started up. Let's just say I went to a Baruch college. Over there, they force you to take a ton of different courses before you get into their business course, their business school. So they force you to take like finance and accounting and legal and economics and programming, et cetera, et cetera. And I already had a little bit of a background in running a business. My family owns a trucking business. So I was kind of already doing a lot of what, let's just say I do throughout my entire career. I was kind of already doing that like on a very small scale. And once I got into Baruch and like you started weeding down into what you want to do, it just made sense. I never grew up and be like, I want to be an accountant. I want to be in finance. Like I was never excited. I was like, that's what I want to do in life. But it sort of made sense. I was enjoying it. It came naturally. We had a successful family business, and those skills just transferred. And I figured, like, why not just continue what already works? I really wanted to when I was getting into this. I really was thinking more development, more IT, but it just came naturally, and that's kind of just that's where I ended up. Couldn't be any happier. Right decision.
And what are these skills that you're talking about that you say were naturally transferred to you that helps you currently in finance?
Yeah, sure. So the family business was a little smaller. So at that point, you have to be like your own mini CEO, let's just call it. So you're doing the payroll, you're doing managing the cash flow, you're putting in the bills, and then calling the customers for funds, and you're making sure you have all the licenses and whatnot. So it was on a very small scale, let's just say sub $2 million. But at that point, you've already really done it all, and now every time you're going to another company, you're transferring those same skills, maybe upgrading a little bit more and gaining more experience as you go on just a much larger scale. So those skills, while I learned them on a very small scale, all transferred to all the way through to where I am today.
Awesome. And what were you doing in this family-led business, specifically from a point of view of finance? Were you into bookkeeping, and did those financial experiences at your family business help you with the hands-on experience that you gained later early on in your career?
Yeah, sure. So there I wore every single hat you could possibly imagine, from calling customers to collecting funds to doing basic bookkeeping and QuickBooks to making sure you're profitable. Obviously, that's at the end of the day, that's probably one of the most important things, making sure you're growing. But again, those skills, when I came into the actual industry, it wasn't, it was substantially transferable, and it wasn't all of a sudden like deer in the headlights, like at my first job. And it's like, what am I doing here? I was a little bit more comfortable. You're taking those skills that you already have, and again, you're just doing it on a larger scale, but without, I guess, without the safety net, because at the end of the day, the owner is your father. It's kind of like there's no trouble here. So next, it's the one transferable skill I'd say that didn't come through would be answering to now a boss where you're liable. But the skills all remain the same: the bookkeeping, the making sure you're paying bills on time, making sure you're profitable, etc. These skills all came through, and it's very helpful. And again, with the schooling and the actual physical knowledge of closing the gaps, it set me up on the right path to where I am today at Empeon.
I want to know more about your transition period from college to your first job. How was that like? And I remember us discussing that early on in your career, you had hands-on experience with bookkeeping. So what were the transferable skills from college that helped you in your first job? And then what did you learn from your experience in bookkeeping early on in your career?
Yeah. So prior to college, I didn't really have look. I use intuition to run a business and as much as I can, but I didn't have those actual accounting skills of making sure you're closing month end properly, you're accruing to the right month, you're accruing all your revenue and expenses to the right month, and depreciations and all that. Definitely something I was missing early on, I guess, running the family business. But then you go to school, you become a lot more trained, and now you're applying those to your first job. So again, back to before that, there was really no consequences. There was no harm done, but there was really not consequences to depreciating the trucks correctly or whatever it is. But once you're at your first job, you got to perform. There's no oops, I didn't know that. They're paying you to know that. And at that point, you got to change your mindset a little bit and be a lot more professional and a lot less lenient than you're expecting with the family business. But those school skills really transferred over. The reality is there's no chance I could do what I do today if I had not gone to school. And those skills that I took in the first job, and I constantly build on going to the next job, and you're building on top of that. And on top of that, you're adding new skills and learning more and constantly educating yourself. I till this day, I do not stop learning. It's not in school, but I'm gonna embarrass myself here, but my wife laughs at me because I always have some form of textbook in my hand at all times. Like I'm constantly reading on something new that I don't know. So even to this day, I consider myself a student and trying to transfer new skills, taking courses, etc. I'm constantly. I'm the biggest. I probably the biggest revenue generator for Udemy. The amount of courses I've taken on Udemy over the past 2 years, I'm like, I'm supporting them myself. So a lot of skills are constantly transferable from prior jobs and from constantly learning.
Awesome. Can you tell our audience what did you study in school, and this never stop learning attitude that you have? Would you attribute it back to your experiences in school or something else?
Great question. To answer first the second part, it's the constant motivator to learn. Just to quickly start, what I learned in school is accounting. You have to have that foundation if you want to get somewhere into finance, even as a CFO, which might not be particularly in accounting where you got to start in accounting. You still have to understand. All CFOs understand accounting, even though they might not be traditional accountants. So that skill was definitely important in school. Anything accounting related in finance courses, but the drive to keep learning, it's because I don't feel that there's never a point where I'm going to get comfortable and say I know it all. It's impossible. To this day, I'm constantly learning new skills, and the drive is to constantly better myself. That transfers to the business. again, I'm constantly taking courses and things that generally wouldn't even have anything to do with finance, but benefit the business. The past 2 years have been all courses on Udemy on programming, taking a ton of programming courses. And some aspects of that does transfer to the current business, into Empeon as well. But it's just that constant drive. I want to learn and better the business and that directly flows down and betters myself. I'll end up dying in learning in a course. Like my last day will be on Earth will be at taking some type of course of some sort. I can't stop learning. I love it. You know, and now with this whole like chat GPT thing, this whole AI business, it's just opened up a whole new journey. So it's getting there. Machine learning. It's just the possibilities are endless.
Awesome. I have so many questions. I mean,
Please.
dabbled into AI there, and I'm so curious about, every time I speak to any CFO, I ask them what has been the biggest impact AI has had on your role, on finance teams, and your company in general. Like, do you have some quick remarks on that?
Sure. So the reality is, I love it. I'm extra careful because I'll answer that in two questions. Empeon is starting to get on that themselves, but on a personal note, from my perspective, I'm careful. It's a double-edged sword and it's a crutch. So I'm careful. I'm trying to do as much as I can myself. And at a certain point, yeah, I do utilize some of the more AI functionality to plug some holes when I have some questions here and there. But I don't want to start dumbing myself down and just getting all questions into there. But it's starting to also creep into my current day job more than just your standard AI, more machine learning a little bit. Starting to experiment with that in terms of projections and whatnot. But obviously, I'm starting to get to the point where some of the machine learning stuff is a lot more interesting. I guess it's a subsection of AI, not exactly, it's a little bit of a subsection, but there's a lot of patterns and projections that I, as a human being, can't see that I'm starting to utilize in my day-to-day work. So that is needed. So it's a love-hate relationship. But at one point, I don't want to get too reliant because I prefer like the gut feeling and intuition. But at the other point, there are certain gaps where I personally, nobody could particularly see with the amount of data that we're seeing. So that aspect is still needed, and it's just kind of where it is at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of CFOs agree with you on the cons of AI being that there's always this danger of, dumbing yourself down. But one of the pros that you highlighted is that AI and ML is aiding financial projections for you. So how does that look like? And like, what kind of methodology or what kind of tools are you experimenting with right now to help you project accurately? Because there's always this danger of the data that these AI tools vomit. Sometimes it is inaccurate, it is made up data. So how
Oh,
do you ensure that the financial projections are accurate?
oh yeah. Okay. So so I'm gonna get into a whole long conversation here. Stop me when I start rambling.
Sure.
So the method that I'm using, the tools I'm using is Python. And then once I got comfortable with that, I took a course probably over. I told you like I'm the biggest user of Udemy. I did probably two Python courses over 6 months, and then I expanded and did another four-month course in machine learning using Python, and specifically some of the time series modules. For example, all of the ARIMA, SARIMA, neural networks, Facebook Profit. There's a ton of tools that utilize for machine learning. So what I did is I take some of the data from Empeon, and well, first I have my own forecast projections of what I think Empeon, let's just say, for example, what the next 12 to 24 months should look like, discussing, working with our sales teams, etc. And we're in a SaaS space, so it's a little easier. But what I do is I then take that same data, or historical data, I run it through these models, and then I do back testing to see how it operated based on previous data. To like, I do back testing. So what happens is I say, okay, let's go from historical data up until 2022, and how did it look for 2023? And then you run it going forward, and you model that with what you currently think is going to happen in 2025, and then you keep on a monthly basis to see is things panning out the way you expected it. So I don't just use I don't use blindly. I use machine learning or AI just blindly. That's kind of where the pitfall. That's one of the two pitfalls, that and kind of like dumbing yourself down. So it's in conjunction, and kind of goes back to what I was saying regarding more of like a gut feeling. Like I utilize my intuition and use that as it's in the backseat. Like I'm the driver. It's the backseat. And is it proving what I think is going to happen? I don't just take the numbers and say to the CEO, here's what the Sarima said, or here's what Python spit out. That would be risky, and it would be irresponsible on mine. It's here's what I'm seeing, and here's another tool that's showing that it lines up with my vision, or what I've calculated.
You made an interesting point that you are feeding data to these AI models and training them to ensure that whatever it then puts out is in conjunction with your vision. So you gotta feed the vision to these AI models firsthand, like you're feeding them projections of 2022 and then asking it to, come out with projections for 2023. And that is something that I think I'm also definitely aligned with. You got to feed AI data, you got to train it, right? And I'm also thinking along these lines, like, what other kind of data are you anticipating on feeding these AI models? Like, what else would you train them on to automate financial processes at Empeon? Like, what other thoughts do you have vis-a-vis AI, ML, or just automation at this point?
Yeah. So I've only recently, let's say within the past 6 months, started experimenting with this. So I haven't added any other endogenous variables yet. I'm dealing with what I know right now. Again, constantly learning. So I am actually, funny you bring this up, it's learning an additional ways of adding other endogenous variables to your forecasting models. I'm not there yet, so I don't want to touch on that. I am by no means an expert. I'm starting to get comfortable. So I'm just careful to answer that because I don't want to mislead your viewers. As I said, always learning, but I don't have any other factors that I feed to this model yet outside of historical sales.
Awesome. Michelle, you advocate for learning, and I'm just curious, for the viewers who are watching, what are these resources that you're banking upon to, learn about AI, ML, automation in finance? Because these are new fields that have just come up. You said that you've been experimenting for it since the past 6 months. What are some of your favorite resources, you'd say?
So 100% Udemy. My goodness, they are great. They have a course in absolutely everything you can imagine. Another one I like is Code Academy. There's a few of these portals where what you could do is, as you're learning, they have modules, for example, that you can practice. It's their data sets. It's there. They give you questions and you actually practice. And it's not just like a textbook. Even though I love textbooks, it's not like a textbook where you read it and it's the back of your mind. You're actually playing with real data, and then they give you the results. And then they have their own little AI models that like corrects your code here and there. YouTube is a big one. I also, in conjunction with that, have I use ChatGPT here and there to correct coding and whatnot. I've bought a bunch of books. I've just started. I've finished about one or two of them. So there's many resources. I mean, you just one quick Google search and you'll be overwhelmed. But those are where I get most of my information from.
And any particular YouTubers you swear by when it comes to the finance category?
So the ones I use mostly specifically for more programming, I can tell you I learned VBA from a YouTube channel called Wise Owl, and I 100% swear by that individual. I've watched probably 50 hours of his video. I'm not even making that number up. And I've learned VBA directly from that channel. No need for anything else. 100% of it. Look up Wise Owl. Absolutely amazing content. Now there's a lot. There's a lot on Udemy. There's tremendous ones. I would highly recommend if anybody wants to get into some of the more Python or machine language. There's 100 Days of Code for this Python's called 100 Days of Code, and there's another course called zero to hero Python course. Forget the guy's name, but phenomenal resources. Really, really took my skills to the next level, specifically more on like the CFO role.
Awesome. Thank you for this
No,
abundant
for sure.
pool of resources that you shared with us. We digressed. You said that you did accounting back in school, and
Yep,
then you began your first job as a payroll accountant at Focus Ventures.
correct.
Right. So, what were some of your learnings from your role as a payroll accountant? Um, what were some of the mindset changes that you had to make since you transitioned into your first role? You were managing cash flow. Like, what were some of the things that were going on in your mind then?
Sure. So, a funny story. I think I mentioned this, but for your viewers are here as well. My first role was a payroll accountant, but that wasn't even what I applied for. I applied for accounts payable position, and day one I get there and they're like, "We really need help with payroll," and I'm like, "Look, I process payroll. I don't know anything from the flip side. I'm not an expert in any means." I'm like, "I'll do it. I do it." And some of the mind changes was again, unfortunately, I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but it was again working in a more formal office, taking control of the job you're asked to, and being timely. That role specifically wasn't so heavily so cash flow related. Eventually had to work with a manager to tell them what the payroll will be for some of these nursing facilities, how much you're expecting in cash, and what taxes and whatnot. And I'll discuss more cash flow scenarios in a little bit on later companies, but that one wasn't so much heavily focused there. But I found out probably in a little less than a year that particular role wasn't for me. I gained invaluable experience, but that particular role wasn't for me. But I did learn a lot. I did learn a lot. All of the payroll experience that I have and knowledge and understanding the taxes and all that came from there. So that suited me quite well at Empeon because there was a gap in between where I wasn't in the payroll industry. But when I came back into Empeon as leading the CFO role, it was just like that. I already know what I'm talking about, and it also carried through to the rest of the jobs, meaning the rest of the roles that we're at, you also have to, deal with payroll and month end and accruals and all that. So I was comfortable there, but I already had all that basic knowledge of everything payroll related coming to run a payroll company.
Right. And then you went on from, payroll to a controller role. I want to understand how was that switch like for you, and what were the differences in the roles and responsibilities at Focus Ventures and at C plus A Global, and how were you able to make that switch?
Sure. So just a little clarity. That was the assistant controller over at CNA Global. And then I ended up, once the controller left, I didn't become controller. So I ended up becoming the right-hand man to the CFO. And that's where I learned a lot of my skills that transferred to the next role where cash flow became important. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But that was all of a sudden, Focus Venture was a smaller company. And then I went to CNA Global and it's all of a sudden it's like, huge. I mean, a whole different entity. Like this is a big entity. Like without getting into their figures, this was like a monster compared to where we were at that time. And I proved myself a little bit over a year, and that again needed a mind change shift because I was not at that time ever exposed to those different level of an operation of that size, or I guess dollar value, all that, like the amount of entries, the amount of transaction, like this was a whole different scale for me. So after a year of kind of proving myself and getting to the point where I was highly trusted by the CFO, my real experience kicked in where one day the CFO came to me, is like, look, you're doing a great job. Here's what I'd like you to do. We have a ton of subsidiaries. They're large, but you be the mini CFO for them. I'll be the CFO here. I'll see everything, but we have these large subsidiaries. You handle it. And that's anything from the cash flow. That's anything from not the bookkeeping, but more from the aspect of the month end, making decisions. And that's when I got my like real grasp. I didn't take my training wheels off yet because I was still not running the show. But there was a real shift there, and it's like, okay, these will roll up into the parent company, these subsidiaries, and I can't screw up here. So there was another mind shift change there, going from payroll accounting to all of a sudden becoming an assistant controller. And that mindset really changed of like, there's real responsibility here. I am in charge of these entities. And if I screw up, then it'll make my boss look bad. And we don't want that. That's kind of where that shift changed.
Right. And was there a shift in the industry in which these entities belong to? I'm trying to understand the transformation here. Like you said, it was massive in terms of scale, but what about their motion, PLG, SLG, industries that they belong to? Did that also, update itself? And was that also something that you had to wrap your head around, as you yourself said, as the right hand to the CFO?
Yeah. Luckily for me, it was industry shift of something at that point that I wanted to do.
Okay.
Meaning, I never really, shouldn't say it on recording, but I never really thought I want to be in the payroll industry initially. I love it now, but at that time it wasn't for me. So I switched over to more of a manufacturing industry, and I always wanted to be in either tech or manufacturing, both really fascinating to me, and I got that chance. CNA Global is one of the largest manufacturers of cameras. They own some big names like Polaroid and some other large names, and I had already prepared myself to get into that industry and to get into the manufacturing and have all that knowledge. Um, so when I transitioned, yeah, there was a mindset and yeah, there was a industry change, but I kind of shifted myself to what I already wanted to do and what I was comfortable that I could do. So it is obviously a challenge, but it wasn't a shock. The payroll was more of a shock. I knew nothing about, FICA and Medicare and federal and withholdings and all that. That was a little more of a shock. So I kind of unshocked myself in a good way because that's kind of what I wanted to do.
Right. And how did you then train yourself on the go for this kind of a challenge? Of course, it seems like you were up for it. You're up for any challenge. But how were you training yourself on the go back then?
So there was less training and more, I would say, finding somebody who you can work for who's more of a mentor. I worked for a real brilliant individual, and one of the things I'll never forget that he told me, he's like, listen, first off, there's no such thing really as an accounting emergency, and there's nothing wrong in making mistakes unless as long as you learn from them and you correct it going forward. And he said, don't worry, just operate. Go ahead, do month end. Maybe you made a mistake, you'll figure it out. Go ahead, play around with this. And he constantly challenged me and said, don't feel stressed of making a mistake. We'll fix it. We'll catch it. You're not about to, if you're, instead of writing a check for $100, you write a check for $1 billion, like it's a stupid mistake. You'll catch it. We'll fix it. We'll delete it. It won't even get to the point where you get to the financials. Don't worry about it. So it was less about training myself and more about finding the right work environment and finding the right role and working for the right individual that makes that transition and makes that learning experience pleasurable as opposed to scared. And I carry that to any individual that I hire. I start first day and I say, do not be stressed. Learn. Don't worry. You make a mistake, I'll catch it. Don't worry about it. We'll fix it. Really just learn and see if you like the role. There's no harm. Again, nobody's cutting $1 billion check. Like you're not about to cause any damage. Take it in stride. That's realistically where, really, really helped me. That mindset really started my career on the right path.
Awesome. And, we were talking about your role as an assistant controller at C+A Global. Then you went on to become the financial controller at LBU. I'm trying to understand, at what point for you, or in which role would you say, did finance become more about than just reporting numbers? It became more about influencing, business decisions. And I would like to think that that came about, and I think in our previous discussions also you've highlighted that came about at Empeon. But yeah, I mean, what would you say with regard to that?
Sure. The mindset really started shifting. Where it really occurred was at Tactical Logistics. That was the first time where I ran my own show, in the sense of I was the CFO. I made the financial decisions and I started helping the owner execute his vision. That's where the mindset started. And I'll get into more detail, but where like it solidified occurred at LBU, which was the next job right after that. But the mindset started to shift as more strategic in at Tactical. And the reason for that was seeing I'm running my own show. It wasn't about just getting the day-to-day done. It wasn't about just managing cash flow. It was the owner was counting on you to grow the company. So I had to execute on whatever he needed, in addition to making sure that operations is running. The owner wasn't day to day making sure orders are going out or boxes were shipped or receiving happened. This was a logistics company, a third party logistics company, and it wasn't about he didn't, not that he didn't care about day to day. That wasn't his focus. It was how am I executing my vision to grow this company. So once I came in and I had that mind shift of, okay, I'm no longer answering to somebody. People are now strictly answering to me. I have to make the decisions. I also need to have a strategic mindset and support the owner. And from there, we grew the company from one entity to three. So it was, you have to operate on two different scales. Operate on a day-to-day basis, because it was not the biggest company. It was still, a medium-sized company where you still have, as a CFO, I still have that controller hat on, where I still need to do the month end and operations and whatnot and manage cash flow. But I get to the office and I quickly took off the hat and I put another one in. How are we growing this company? And that's where the real shift occurred. It wasn't really so much at Empeon at that point. Well, much more established. That's where that occurred.
Awesome. And at what stage of the business does a company typically hire a CFO?
When the owner or the CEO is strictly having conversations about growth and strategic and compliance, when it's no longer about, hey, do we have sufficient cash flow to run a business? Now, again, I might, some of your viewers might disagree. But at that point, when the CEO is more focused on strictly strategic point of view, you need a CFO at that point. And the reason I say that is, a lot of, you could have a lot of places that the CFO has both the CFO role and hat and the controller hat. But if the CEO is really about growing the company and you're a lot more stable, it's time for a CFO. A $500,000 company where you're being scrappy and making sure the bills are paid and all that, you probably don't need a CFO at that stage. If you're a 10, 20, 30, $40 million company, and you're stable and you can trust your bookkeeping and your controller to run a company, and the owner is like, hey, where are we going next? What industry are we attacking? Are we rolling out nationwide or just focusing on certain states? You need a more strategic partner, and you need to start separating the controller position and let them do what they're good at, the month end, the daily day. And then you need that partner who's with you and their mind's not about running the operations day to day, even though you think you might still need to be there. You need that guy. And at that point, that's, I think, where like you start. There's no dollar value, I should say, but that's when that decision should start. Decision making or that thought about hiring that individual should start occurring.
Awesome. And how does the CFO help their team, think more strategically? Because you said it is, of course, the CFO's job to think more strategically about the business, to think beyond numbers. But how do you help your team think that way? Like, what is the training process for it, or what are the resources that help them guide them through this journey? And do you think it's relevant or important for the team to think beyond reporting, to think beyond compliance?
Yeah, very interesting question. I think realistically it's not so much about training, it's more making sure that everybody understands the mission. And I would say from a CFO perspective, you generally expect the controller to get you what you need because they understand that the data that I'm collecting is for decision-making purposes, is where the company's going. So if the controller understands that, underneath them, they're now have a whole bookkeeping team, and you want them to understand what's their mission, right? I need to make sure that we're entering the bills as timely, that we're paying timely, that we're collecting cash on time, because my boss has a mission that he needs to collect this data, make sure that they're accurate financials, because his boss will be making decisions on it. So it's not so much about training, it's about the mindset, and you understand that you're driving a mission that constantly flows up because somebody on that ladder or that waterfall is relying on your work for that. So it's getting out of the mindset that I'm just doing a job because I'm doing a job, but rather because my work will eventually lead to a decision that will be made by somebody, and my work is taken and I give it to the CEO and he makes a decision on where the company's going. So it flows through and it just getting to them to understand what the mission is as opposed to just doing a job.
Got it. And based off of your experience at Empeon, I want to understand, how does the finance function and the different roles within it evolve as a company like Empeon grows in revenue and in headcount? How does the finance function for you evolve then? How do the different roles come into the picture? And at what stage do they come into the picture?
So as you grow in revenue, not just Empeon, but any company, I can say specific on Empeon, your mindset starts shifting from what revenue state you're at to what you should be focused on. And let's apply this to any company. Again, if you're a small company and you're let's just say you're sub $1 million, your mindset and your entire team, your bookkeeping is not about, hey, what are we going to do in 10 years? Where is our revenue going? Your mindset is about operating a company, making sure you're collecting cash, and making sure that company's alive. As your growth starts happening, as you're getting to the $5 and the $10 million, those things are important, but also, are we growing? Are we profitable? Once the dollar value starts growing, you're 20, 30, 40, $50 million, every position is now a little bit more elevated because, like to say, for example, myself, it's no longer thinking about, okay, am I making that extra dollar? It's how do I get our company to 5x, to 10x in the next 2 years, 5 years, 6 years. The mindset shifts because the dollar value and the reference is no longer the same. I wouldn't have thought like that when I'm running when we're running a small family business. My mind was not, how am I getting to that $100 million? Yeah, I wish, but that's not very realistic. Now my mindset is there. How it's as we grow, as your revenue grows, you start thinking different of your challenges, and your goals are different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. And what would you say are common signals that a company needs to move beyond cash accounting or cash-based revenue tracking? So when does, for a company, revenue recognition become a priority?
It's almost like instant. When you're an individual running your own little small shop, whatever that business might be, fine. That might be okay for like a small business, a small store, or a owner operator of some sort, where you're thinking about, okay, am I have enough cash right now to make sure I paid my lights? So that's my expense for this month, and I took a salary. That's fine. Once you're crossing any small threshold and you're starting to hire a person, or you're hiring two, and your company's starting to get a little bit more legit, and now you have your payrolls, like cash accounting, rarely works. Might be some industries that, yeah, okay, maybe cash accounting might be a little bit, I guess, might be more relevant. But I can think of very few scenarios where I would ever recommend staying on cash accounting out once you're growing. Almost never. I hate to say it, but some people might disagree, but I could not make proper business decisions at almost any scale by using cash accounting. It just wouldn't make sense.
Right.
I
So,
wish there was more to say. It's just that literally that's the truth.
so you wouldn't say there's a revenue threshold that a company would want to cross before?
Look, if I had to arbitrarily pick a number, I don't want to put a dollar value because I'm sure I'm going to get 50 messages saying like, "What do you mean? I'm a $10 million company and I'm using cash, cash accounting, not accrual," and and they might be right. So there's no dollar value, but again, once you're starting to feel that there's traction, you're hiring some employees. You want very accurate financials. You want to know what your real cost of payroll is for the month. Let's just say if somebody's sending, if a customer right now, let's just say a customer sent you a $50,000 deposit, like you didn't earn it in the first month. It doesn't really add up. You're selling yourself up for trouble in the long run. So get out of that accounting method as soon as possible. Like I've never even used it to the point where I'm like that I can even recommend it.
Right. And throughout your professional journey, you worked with companies at different growth stages. I want to understand, how did you approach cash flow differently in these companies?
Great question. Yeah, fantastic question. Probably one of the most important, the lifeblood of any company. The smaller you are, the bigger challenges you have. Unfortunately, some of the smaller companies that I've worked at, still large by all means, but you're more worried. Your mindset, the first company where I took over, which was tactical, the mindset is, uh-oh, if my AR rep isn't collecting and I don't have that cash to pay payroll, like I'm in trouble and I'm personally liable for that. You have a ton of employees who are relying on you. So it's more reactive and scared. You're making a lot more conservative decisions because the cash flow is tighter. And you're more worried about, I need to make sure day to day is happening. When you're working at a much more established company, let's just say the Empeon, whatever, that's not where my mindset is. And it's also different industries. In Empeon, for example, the cash flow is different because you're a SaaS company and you're dealing more with MRR. And I know generally what's going to happen for the next few months from a cash flow perspective. It's relatively easy versus more in the manufacturing historically. Your mindset of, I need to collect on, in manufacturing, you don't collect for almost 120 days in certain circumstances. And your cash flow budget, you better be right. There's no mistakes there. And you better hope that your reps are on the phone all day. So you're reactive and you're scared. And you're still making good decisions, but your mindset's always that. And as you're in a larger company, as your cash flow is a lot more stable, you're free to utilize your mindset towards growth, towards profitability, towards improving the company. You're no longer making scared decisions. And that's kind of where I am right now. And it's more, you see, as I had mentioned at the beginning of the call, I can allocate a lot more of my time to making sure that my forecasts are better. I can make sure that I'm making sure that Empeon is compliant with all regulations. My mental capacity is a lot freer because a lot more stability in your cash flow. So not all cash flow is equal, as I just mentioned. You're making reactive decisions or you're making future growth decisions. You're operating a little different based on where the company is in their life stage and how they're handling their cash flow.
Right. Could you also shed light on the difference in the pricing and billing approach when you are looking at cash flow at an established company, which is pretty much, I would say the cash flow is stable, versus when you have a reactive approach towards cash flow at, let's say, a small manufacturing company?
Sure. Oh, yeah, I got a good one for that one. The pricing has to be a lot more spot on with a lot less discretion and a smaller company with tighter cash flow. I had worked at one of these entities. I don't rather not use their name, which one specifically, but we had a customer that they made up about 15% of the business. And one of the questions I was asked is, we have a ton of cash flow coming in. Why are we struggling to pay bills? What's going on? And it took me some time to figure that question out. That was not an overnight idea. It took time. And I spoke with professionals, I spoke with consultants, I spoke with vendors who had a lot of experience. And after a lot of digging and a lot of analysis, what I found out that customer that had 15% of our business, their pricing didn't make sense 7 years ago. It was one of those things that you got to think about pricing was your pricing you give today, even as a new business owner, can have a huge impact on your business in 10 years. If a customer has 15% of your business and you gave them bad pricing back then because you wanted their business, and they're now with you 10 years later and that pricing makes no sense, your costs went up. You're still charging them the last rate. And what happens, the best part of all this, is that you can't let's just say you come in and you're like, okay, I'm going to give you a 5% increase. What's 5%? Let's just say 10 years later, right? You're scared to lose them. I've seen this in many scenarios. You're scared to lose them. So you're like, for year one, I'll give them a percent increase. Year two, you give them a 3.5% increase, whatever it is. 10 years later, you've given them no meaningful price increase. You didn't think about your pricing. So now your cash flow is tight 10 years later because you made a mistake. You didn't make a mistake. I take that back. You made a conscious business decision 10 years ago. And then when I found out that pricing makes no sense, I can give them a 20% increase today and it would make no impact in my cash flow. And then it made a real decision-making as a CFO, and it was, do we let them go? But because of the pricing and how tight the cash flow is now, do we let them go? But they contribute towards your fixed costs, so you're making a risky decision. And ultimately that worked out. We did let them go, and luckily for me, thank God, we filled them up with two other large customers that were like 7.5% and 7.5%. So it worked out. But fast forward to today, I don't have those challenges. I can give better pricing because first off, we give competitive pricing. I'm in line with the market. I have no pressure on me. So when the head of sales and head of marketing come up to me and they're like, hey, we have a real big client, but we got to give them a nice discount here. The pricing has to be a little lower than the market. I'm like, go for it. To me, it's all bonus. Obviously we're not going to give the software away for free, but we can become a lot more competitive. Cash flow, thank God, there's no complaints. It's great. And, it's just the stage of the business. And did the owner at that time take a stance? And it's like, look, I'm not going to get into this industry at all costs versus, I understand what they're thinking at that time, but the cash flow, and to answer your question about the billing prices, the prices of your product has an effect down the line. It really does.
Right. Michelle, that example you quoted was super insightful. It clarified for me how you approach, pricing and billing. I think my final question to you is going to be for the finance folks who are watching this webinar, when they encounter cash flow challenges, what are the top 2 lessons that you want to leave them with when it comes to thinking about how you approach pricing and billing?
So there's I'll try to keep it to 2. There's many different answers there.
You can give me 5.
What is that?
You can give me 5. It's fine.
No, so I'll give a few items and an extra answer to something you just said, another approach. Pricing, this is very hard for a new business to absorb what I'm about to say, but don't, if you're trying to break into a market and your worth, stick to it, number one. Don't make a decision that you'll regret later down the line because you were desperate to get a sale right now. That might hurt you. So definitely stick to the value that you have. Don't, if you're, let's just make it up for a second. If you're a lawyer and you're worth $1,000 an hour and you really want that client, you're like, hey, I'll do it at $200 an hour. Like, don't give in just because you feel desperate now. Grow your business, know your worth, and stick to it. And in addition, make sure that you're valuing your services or your products correctly, because remember, kind of just on what I just touched on was what I said, like, your vendors, they don't care. They're going to mark you up. They're going to come back and next month you're going to be like 10% increase and 10%. And if you're relying on them because your business is tied to them, that you need their service, you're going to give into whatever price increase they demand. Now, you can go shop around, but you're probably very comfortable with what you already know. But your customer might not need you as much. It's possible, right? If your product is not as sticky and you have other competitors that can swoop in, so you might not be able to increase them as much. So if you started off with bad pricing, your vendor is going to take advantage. You can't pass that on, and you'll quickly start seeing your margins dwindle. So from the get-go, you need to make sure your pricing is correct. I understand the challenge, and it's much easier said than done in this podcast to just give the highest pricing. But to sum up the theme of this conversation of think like a CFO from the beginning. Don't wait till you get to the CFO later. Understand that whatever decisions you make now are going to have an impact down the line. And if the CEO is coming to you and it's like, look, I have a customer and he's going to bring us $1 million worth of business, but we got to give them this pricing. Does it make sense? Are you going to be a strategic partner and put your foot down? Or are you going to just give in and deal with those consequences down the line? And that's the kind of shift of the CFO mindset that really encompasses this whole theme. And I think you had mentioned another, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, another question about like cash flow, about some of the challenges. In addition, you got to get creative, especially at the beginning. If you're a new CFO, you don't have much experience, and maybe some of the companies are struggling. Get creative, and what that means is call your customer and extend your terms. Use a credit card. Play with the flow. I hate some of these tactics at the beginning where you gotta be a little scrappy. I hate to say it, but ask them for a few more days, and not to check a day later. That's a terrible one, but cash flow is it coincides with being a CFO. So you have to have all these ideas in mind: the pricing, the collection, it's all one big picture.
Yeah, I mean, that's super actionable advice. Loved it. Thank you, Michelle, for talking to us. I'm sure the audience will have plenty to take away from this webinar. Do you have any parting thoughts before I close?
I would say, look, for anybody, if you're already at the CFO level, I hope I added something. If not, maybe somebody reach out to me and teach me something. I don't know. Always love learning. But for more of the younger individuals, I definitely recommend, maybe take calculated risk. Don't do anything to risk your career, but if you're going through my journey, constantly learn. It's important to constantly upskilling. Very important. Constantly add skills that differentiate yourself from your colleague, your competitor who's seeking the same job. And take calculated risk. Like, one of the things I tell most individuals that ask me kind of some more of the same questions of how do you get to these roles? How do you do that? It's differentiate yourself and add value. I know it sounds so generic, but if you're not adding much value to your role, why would somebody promote you from controller to a next entity where you're the CFO? What did you do? What value did you add? And that's when I say take a little bit of calculated risk, and I'll try not to run over time here. But I'm saying calculated risk of do something extraordinary that goes above and beyond, that showcases your skills and kind of what you've learned and how you've added to one company, that you've made them better, that you can now take to the next place, and start at that ground floor with those skills. And you already came in making the company, you already brought in the transferable skills, you brought into the next company, and you started with greatness now and add again. And that's how you get to these roles. because they see from day one, like, oh wow, this person's adding value. So add value through calculated risk. Don't overstretch yourself, but that's where I'll leave it off.